Bro, this started as a crackpot theory, but the more I look into it, geez, I think I solved some of FNAF's biggest mysteries. By the way, I'm using a voice generator to record this since I have COVID and my throat hurts really bad. Okay, so this probably isn't true, but I think that there is enough circumstantial evidence to at least entertain the idea. We all know the Afton family, right? William Afton as the father, Purple Guy, the murder, etc. His wife, who we know little to nothing about. Then there are his 3 kids, Michael Afton, older brother Bully, Foxy Mask, living corpse sent to stop his father, Elizabeth Afton. The only daughter dies and becomes baby, and the crying child. The bite victim, one soul-haunting Fredbear whose real name may or may not be Evan. I'll just be referring to him as crying child for sake of simplicity. But hold on, do we know this for sure? I mean, Michael is never given a last name, neither is crying child. The only kid we know for sure is related to William is Elizabeth. By the way, this talks a lot about the same things MatPat says in his video game theory, FNAF, the monster we missed, FNAF VR, help wanted. And I haven't watched other theory videos on this topic besides MatPat's, so apologies if this has already been discussed and elaborated on by other people before. Hear me out. I got this idea from the FNAF movie, where Michael is not related to William Afton at all. Neither is his dead younger brother, who is a stand-in for crying child. In the movie, the only kid William has is Vanessa, who in the games is somewhat a stand-in for Elizabeth, whether it be symbolically or perhaps she reminded him of Elizabeth and that's why he chose her, etc., and in the movie is explicitly a stand-in for Elizabeth. She has no siblings in the movies. She's an only child. We all just kind of figured that the movie was like the books, where there are definitely parallels to the games, but is in an alternate universe where some things don't match up. And while that is true to at least some extent, considering that Vanessa and Michael's siblings are given different names than the kids in the games, I think that it is possible that the family dynamics may be more accurate than we first thought. What if Michiel and Crying Child aren't Afton's but Emily's? That would make Charlie, victim of William, possessing the puppet, their sister. Why is this program pronouncing Michael this way? Whatever, just ignore it. Let's look at some evidence. Granted, most is circumstantial, but at least hear me out. Also a disclaimer. While I am very knowledgeable about FNAF, I am not very familiar when it comes to the books besides the first 2 novels, or particularly the VR games. So if there are any points there that could explain or debunk some of the points I have, please let me know. Family dynamic parallels in the movie. Michiel is the oldest sibling and is given the same name from the movie and the games. That would make Garrett a parallel to Crying Child and Abby a parallel to Charlie. I know we all thought that Abby is supposed to be paralleling baby Elizabeth because of the letters of her name, but remember, Vanessa is already paralleling Elizabeth. That seems a little weird to have 2 completely different characters paralleling the same one in the games, wouldn't it? This would still be consistent too, since Charlie in the books does have a connection to Baby. Baby was the intended adult version of Charlie's 4 robot bodies, and the adult version was just hijacked and haunted by Elizabeth after being scooped by her. So Abby having a similar name to Baby could still imply a connection to Charlie. Design details. Character design has always been consistent when it comes to Scott making characters. Each kid has explicit hair and eye colors that follow into whatever other media they are introduced in. In one of the Fazbear Frights books, for example, siblings are always described with the same hair and eye colors. If Michiel, Crying Child, and Elizabeth are all siblings, that would make this the one case where their designs don't match. The boys have brown hair and nondescript but possibly brown eyes, where Elizabeth has blonde hair and green eyes. Sure, it is definitely possible for siblings to have completely different hair and eye colors in the real world, but this is FNAF, and stuff like that doesn't really happen here. It would make more logical sense for the boys to be brothers to Charlie, who also has brown hair and nondescript but possibly brown eyes. At least in the games, the books make it explicit that she has brown eyes. FNAF 4 Sisters Room. If Charlie is the boy's sister, then that would still explain the sisters' room in FNAF 4 and why it's empty. It's because Charlie was killed by William before. It also explains why there's a broken Toy Foxy mangle in the room. In the books, Charlie was known to love seeing how the animatronics worked. Henry probably gave her one to deconstruct and reconstruct to play with. Also, keep the idea of a FNAF 2 animatronic being in this game in your for later. Charlie has a twin brother in the books. Though not stated in the games, in the books, Charlie had a twin brother, Sammy. At first, it appeared that Sammy was taken and killed by William, but it turned out that it was Charlie who was taken instead and killed as a toddler. Though Sammy's fate is unknown, whatever happened to him, the fact that Charlie has a brother at all is interesting. Perhaps Crying Child is her twin brother? More on this later. Midnight Motorist. As MatPat said in the video I mentioned before, in Midnight Motorist, the mustard man isn't William Afton, but instead Henry. In one of the books, Henry is depicted wearing an orange shirt, and mustard man is an orangey color. MatPat goes into more detail about it in his video, if you want more info about it. Even so, this explains the grave we see in the mini-game, it being Charlie's grave, since no one else has died yet. Sister location security cameras in FNAF 4 house. This can still explain why there are cameras in the FNAF 4 house seen in sister location. If that is Henry's house, then of course he would have cameras set up after his daughter was killed. He's worried that the same thing could happen to his two boys, so he keeps an eye on them constantly. It would make more sense than if William had them in his house, just to keep an eye on his son, because at this point in the timeline we had first assumed there should be no reason to spy on Crying Child, since William would not have started the experiments in the bunker when they were installed. Instead, the bunker could have been built by, or at least for, Henry, though it was probably for a different purpose at the time he made it. The bunker is under his house after all. Perhaps since Afton was his business partner, he converted it years later to what we see in sister location. Definitive start to the timeline. There has been the debate for a long time as to who died first, Crying Child or Elizabeth. Evidence for Elizabeth dying first is that Crying Child's nightmares, specifically Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare himself, have stomach mouths that are similar to how Elizabeth got scooped by Baby. However, if Elizabeth died first, then what was William's motive to catch and kill kids? We all kind of figured that because Crying Child was William's kid, then that was the motive. Experimenting on kids to bring his son back to life, and Elizabeth just kind of got in the way accidentally. But if Crying Child is an Emily and not an Afton, this could explain the timeline of events. Charlie dies first, and William sees that the puppet was brought to life thanks to her remnant, either because he's a psychopath who doesn't really need a motive besides sick curiosity, or possibly because he wants to make more lifelike animatronics, maybe out of jealousy for Henry's Craft IDK. He decides to start experimenting on kids to try to replicate the result. He makes the fun times to kidnap and kill kids, but Elizabeth gets scooped instead. Crying Child was there to witness the scooping and then gets nightmares over it, which are reflected in the Nightmare animatronics designs. The Bite of 87 versus the Bite of 83. In FNAF 4, we see an ad on the TV that shows the year 1983. This implicated that the game took place in 1983, and the bite we saw wasn't the Bite of 87, but the Bite of 83. That means there's two bite incidents, right? But what if that's not what it's saying? FNAF 4 is full of Easter eggs and references to other games in the series. We've got Mangle in Charlie's room, and a tiny toy Chica doll is missing her beak like in FNAF 2. But hold on for a moment. A FNAF 2 reference in FNAF 4. FNAF 4 should take place 4 years before then if it's 1983. FNAF 2 is in 1987. So what's going on here? Well, what if the date on the TV isn't the date that the game takes place? What if it's referencing the date that Charlie died? In the books, we see her gravestone and it said 1980, 1983, making her 3 years old when she died. Now, remember what I said earlier about Crying Child possibly being her twin brother? Well, there is no good parent who would let their 3-year-old walk around by himself outside of the house, even in the 08s. But if this is 1987, he would be 7 years old, still young, but able to walk around the block by himself in the 80s. Besides, he has psychic friend Fredbear, i.e., cameras, watching him constantly to look out for him. This would in fact make the bite we see, the Bite of 87. Some may argue that it can't be, since in the first game, the phone guy says that a person can live without the frontal lobe, implying that they survived. But think about it like this. That was the very first game. Scott has said that he retconned many things in the early games so that he could tell a better story that he had no intention of doing when he made the first game. This could be one of the retcons. This started as a crackpot theory, but the more evidence I find, the more I'm becoming convinced. But what do you guys think? Did I just solve some of the greatest mysteries in FNAF? Leave comments and criticisms in the comments below. I'd love to hear evidence from both sides.